Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. I'm delighted to welcome you all in the Risk and Management webinar. My name is Alba Kecha, the Account Manager for Risk Management in PCB and the organizer of this webinar as well. Today's topic will be on achieving integrated mandatory compliance with ISO 31000, which will be presented by Bogdan Dragomir, a security professional with over 24 years of experience in the IT field, over 5 years as a regional security manager with Savvis Communications. To find out much more and ask your questions related to the topic, today's webinar will cover the following: the overview of ISO 31000, the overview of PCI and HIPAA compliance, and achieving integrated compliance through ISO 31000. Before Bogdan begins his presentation, I would like to ask the audience to please write down any questions you may have during the webinar in the chat box on your control panel, and we will respond to a few of them at the end and answer to the remaining through email. Thank you very much. Bogdan, you may start the presentation.
Well, thank you, Alba, and welcome everyone. I would say, without no further ado, let's start with it. We'll skip my presentation, which Alba already gave, and we'll dig right into the presentation that makes today's topic. The idea of having this presentation is to clarify the common points between ISO 31000 and the mandatory compliance that most of the world is subject to, specifically PCI. HIPAA is mostly on the US territory, so that will make a little bit less of the discussion for today, but nonetheless, everything that I will say about PCI and ISO 31000 can be ported or applied to HIPAA as well. Obviously, if you can't explain it simple, you don't understand it well enough, and that doesn't belong to me. As you can see, it belongs to Albert Einstein. And what I'm trying to convey through that is that really risk management and mandatory compliance are really simple tasks if they are approached in a organized and structured manner. What is ISO 31000? Let's first say that ISO 31000 has been on the market and has been known for longer than 2009 when ISO became official. ISO 31000 became official, and it used to be known as the Australian standard or New Zealand standard. That has been on the market since 1995. And it has been revised in 99 and subsequently in 2009 in November. When in 2009 has become ISO 31000. At that point, the Australians and New Zealand dropped their standard, the standard that put the foundation for ISO 31000, and they adopted ISO 31000. ISO 31000 does provide a process that provides confidence and plan objectives that will be achieved with an acceptable degree of residual risk. If you go through ISO 31000 and you look at the Principle 3, you will see everything that you can find written on between the lines within every mandatory standard. Every mandatory compliance standard or requirement is going to take you back to Principle number 3. It has been developed, as I said, by Australians and New Zealand Standards Organization, and they provide principles for generic and generic guidelines for risk management. PCI DSS, as you know probably, PCI is the payment card industry standard, the data security standard. It has 12 domains, a lot of mandatory controls, specifically about 142 of 144. PCI DSS is geared towards securing customer card information and PII, the personal identifiable information that is associated with the cardholder. In appearance, it really doesn't have any ties to ISO 31000. It doesn't really spell anything about ISO 31000. As a matter of fact, it really doesn't say anything about risk specifically. However, everything is under the hood of the DSS. Everything that DSS asks is geared towards lowering the risk toward of the cardholder and the cardholder information, and therefore lowering the risk of the supporting organizations like acquirers, processors, banks, and ultimately payment brands like Visa, MasterCard, JB, Discovery. Where the problem lies into, the problem is that the management within the most organizations is focusing on security as an abstract concept of often driven by compliance. So what I mean by that is most of the companies, when they undertake a security project, they think compliance. When they deal with compliance, they think security. Very few organizations look at the compliance as being the resultant of risk management, and even fewer, they look at security as being the resultant of risk management. Now, you might disagree, but I believe that if you don't have risks, there shouldn't be a reason to go and do any kind of compliance. Compliance is focusing on mapping what IT does and really check-marking the boxes, and not many times not accomplishing the requirements, and definitely not looking at the underlying intent of the requirement. Oftentimes, compliance lifecycle is not integrated or supported by anything else other than the fines imposed. Really, I think, well, in the past, nobody cared about anything about compliance. As a matter of fact, compliance concept really didn't exist until PCI started imposing fines and other coercive methods to get merchants onto adopting the DSS, the data security standard. In reality, although the efforts that many companies undertake to become compliant, they do fail. They fail to be compliant, or they fail to maintain at all times compliance posture, because again, what they are addressing, in fact, is the requirement, the letter of the requirement, and they don't look at the intent of the requirement. PCI DSS and other industry mandatory standards rely on organizational implicit CMMI level 3 or above for some of the processes needing to be at the level 4, and I will explain shortly what this is about. Compliance standards are really vertical standards. If you look at it, if you would draw the box, you would have ISO standards, right, international standards, as being horizontal standards that span many industries, and then every industry has a mandatory standard that goes for that vertical. And those mandatory standards, or compliance standards, however you want to call them, are specifically geared to address the most common risks within the industry vertical. Now, those risks, granted, they span many industries, but again, every industry has its own concerns, and they are concerned not, I mean, they are not concerned with other industry vertical risks. So every one of them will claim that they are unique and that they are the best. Now, most of the organizations are subject to more than one compliance requirement. Some of them are subject to PCI, and some of them are subject to HIPAA, but a lot of them will be subject to PCI and HIPAA. And to address two standards, or three or more standards, because some of them are public organizations, so they will have Sarbanes-Oxley in the United States. Some of them will be other types of organizations that have many other standards. And in order to address those standards, organizations should draw a baseline, a common baseline between the standards, and address them. Now, that common baseline, in my experience and in reality from what I've seen and what I've done, is called the ISO 31000 for risk management specifically. So the way to go about adopting more than one compliance or satisfying more than one compliance requirement or more than one compliance standard is to go and comply with a baseline and then customize the rest, which are really the peaks of the industry standard. I mentioned it earlier at the beginning of the presentation that in the real world you shouldn't do security if you don't have any risks. Now in a parent-child relationship, risk is the parent and security is the child. Security is meant to mitigate risk, to address risk, not to mitigate them, but to address the risk and to minimize it. Addressing punctual and narrow requirements while missing their intent is really what I've seen as being the new approach to compliance. There is a great concept out there on the market that is called governance, risk, and compliance. It's a good concept. It's a great concept. It has been very well publicized, and it is realistic. But it is realistic as long as we understand what governance, risk, and compliance is or should be. The bad part of the equation is that it's often misunderstood. It will induce confusion. People are keeping their eyes on the ball and their mind outside of anything that they do. Now, in order to take the best advantage from the concept that is so great, the GRC concept, we would look at the ISO 31000, as I mentioned before, being pretty much the platform on which all those industry standards have been built, because the ISO 31000 is really it really applies to all the organizations, no matter which vertical, which industry vertical they belong to. It does mandate commitment. It does support the design and the framework. It is organization specific. It relies on risk management policy. It does create value. It is meant to be an integral part of the process. Again, if you look at principle number 3, you will see that it has about 10 principles, 11 principles that are tying back into, and you're going to find them into any compliance standard out there. It does specifically and explicitly address uncertainty. It is meant to be part of the decision making. It does rely on implementing frameworks and associated processes, and it does rely on process improvement, which is way too many times overlooked. The biggest value of adopting ISO 31000, it's again in the promotion of continuous improvement and diligent management practices and ongoing monitoring, which I believe it just happens that I believe that if you don't have a process improvement process, it might sound funny, but that's the reality, then you're really not going to be able to achieve any kind of compliance or to do anything in a consistent manner over time, because things change, our industries grow, technology changes, a risk landscape changes. So that continuous improvement and monitoring and measuring must be part of your processes. The biggest value in adopting PCI DSS is really in meeting the minimum security state as recognized by the payment card industry. And other than that, is just being I would say a hustle for most of the organizations, because again, they're looking for a rapid solution that most times is not sustainable or even not feasible for their organizational context. The dangers of adopting either or, ISO 31000 or DSS or HIPAA, again, everything that I'm saying about DSS can be applied to HIPAA. Really, in adopting ISO 31000, there is no danger. We all used to say that security is really common sense. Well, it turns out that common sense is not that common. The danger of adopting PCI DSS and relying on PCI DSS to have a sound organization that is able to manage their risks, not only to achieve compliance, is that it might or might not ensure proper management sponsorship. It might or might not ensure proper readiness for other mandatory compliance bodies. It might not be a sustainable approach. Now, in order for us to go forward and kind of achieve what we're looking to achieve, that checkbox in a sustainable and clear and real and measurable way, we will have to do what makes sense as opposed to just checking the box and saying, yes, we're compliant, paying the money to a QSA organizations or a QSA, or submitting some self-assessment questionnaires that are going to give us a piece of paper saying, oh, you are compliant. The goal is really not to be only compliant. The goal is to have a proven compliance that is going to help your organization maintain its objective and achieve its objectives in a safe way. One of my best friends, his name is Mohammed Akbar. He is from Canada, but he's working in US. During a discussion, he said, unless companies transition from the mindset of regulatory risk management to the comprehensive IT risk management, they will never truly see the long benefit of continual compliance. It's kind of an all-in-one statement of everything that I pretty much said until now. And the reality is that unless we start believing and acting like mandatory compliance is really secondary and the primary objective of the organization is to do risk management, real and quantifiable and qualified risk management, we will never get to the point where we can pass the year and say, yes, we're still compliant. In that sense, what we would need to do, we would have to deploy our risk management framework to create and own our risk catalog and risk rating. We'll have to define the inherent risk. We'll have to look at the threat, vulnerabilities, inherent risk, residual risk, control design, control effectiveness, pretty much everything within the risk management. We'll have to address our controls and assess their effectiveness. We'll have to analyze and look at the residual risk in the context of our risk appetite and come up with a risk treatment. Either we will have to accept it, we can outsource it, or whatnot. We can use and we should use compliance only when making risk treatment decisions. Why? Because compliance is really another risk on our risk catalog. Now, at the beginning of the presentation, one of the slides was talking about CMMI and why some of the processes must be at least level 3, but most of them must be level 4. And that is because, as you'll see in the next slide, level 3 is really the first level where processes are tailored for organization's goal and proactively manage. A CMMI level 3 assesses the synergy between the policies, processes, and process management, rendering consistently the expected results. So again, that goes to sustainability of your processes, sustainability of your compliance, if you want to call it that way, or better yet, sustainability of your risk management program. The CMMI level 4 is defined as the first level of maturity where processes are measured and controlled. In order to achieve a sustainable compliance, organizations must have and must ensure a minimum at minimum change management, asset management, and risk management. Processes that must be at level 4. Where level 4, again, if you look at this slide, is the level where the processes are measured and controlled, and they are quantitatively managed. If we are not able to have sustainable processes, how could we have a sustainable result? We can't. In order to achieve long-term compliance through risk management, we'll have to define and deploy risk management framework. We will have to use ISO 31000 because ISO 31000 is general. It does apply to any industry. We will have to look at our risks in a more granular way. Yes, the risk of disruptions of activity, it is a risk, but it is a general risk. How would that happen? We would have to look at the thresholds and to define our risk appetite, or how others are calling it, the risk universe of our organization. We will have to communicate it. We'll have to make everybody part of our risk management initiative. Keep in mind that risk, one of the principles of ISO 31000 is to be based on the best information available. Nobody has the truth. Nobody, the whole truth. So we will have to share that responsibility with everyone within the organization. As a matter of fact, I have seen organizations that put risk identification in everyone's job description, which is a great thing, because we used to say that security is everybody's job. Same is risk. We will have to communicate why it is everybody's risk. We have to communicate our vision and how our vision matches our organization's mission, or how it helps our organization's mission. We'll have to document the entire process, not just the risk management processes, but upstream and downstream processes. And we will have to make sure that they are integrated, that there is a synergy between them. Without that synergy, those processes are what we call broken processes, processes that work independently, but they don't help each other. Back to our mandatory compliance exercise. As I said before, PCI DSS doesn't really talk about risk management as a required workflow or as a required base for achieving compliance. However, it does rely on it when it allows organizations to use compensating controls, because those compensating controls are meant to address not the requirement, but the intent of the requirement. And if you talk to any QSA, they will tell you that the intent of the requirement is to protect against unauthorized access to your organization's environment, and that's why you have to have a firewall. It really doesn't require asset management, but it does require an inventory. It does require you to have an inventory, and to have the inventory to the detail where you can identify which one is a web server, what's the name, what's the patch level, and what's the hardware that the web server is running on. So asset management, although not clearly required, must be there. And I've seen companies that are trying to do bits and pieces. The best way to do it is to have an asset management process and program in place. PCI DSS doesn't say we need to have change management, but it does require us to perform assessments and pen tests and vulnerability scans that carried on by ASVs every time we have what they call a major change. I honestly think that if we have all those upstream processes or foundation processes in place, achieving compliance would be pretty much a breeze. Because again, achieving compliance is not the goal. The goal is minimizing risk. This is a slide where we pretty much try to put everything together. I already said that having processes at the right maturity level, it is critical, but it's not the only thing that we need to have. In addition to the correct maturity level, we have to ensure flawless process integration, that synergy that I was talking earlier. And that synergy has to be seamless. It cannot be forced. We cannot have a asset management that is not consistent across the entire enterprise, because again, times are changing, business is changing, and whatever is not today in scope of PCI or HIPAA or Sarbanes-Oxley or privacy law in Europe, it might be tomorrow. And if it's going to be tomorrow, then we have to go back and start redoing, and then we're going to have conflicts between different spreadsheets that we use to do asset management, and it's going to become a mess that is going to cost you more in terms of money and time and resources, and will increase frustration. So why deploying ISO and not DSS? So ISO 31000 and not PCI DSS, because ISO establishes a management commitment. DSS assumes it exists. It's always better to say exactly what you want than to let the others kind of think about and hope that they will figure it out. ISO establishes a risk management methodology concept. DSS is using a predefined one. Most common risks within the industry are predefined. They are gathered from across the industry organizations, recompiled into a risk database. But that's unless your main business is PCI DSS and nothing else, then you have more than that. And the danger of adopting only DSS and not looking at your entire risk landscape is that you will miss the risks that will affect you inadvertently in a negative way down the road, affecting your compliance posture. ISO establishes a continual improvement process. DSS is using PCI DSS versions that might be slower than the risk than the evolution of your risk landscape. PCI DSS has a 3 years life cycle. Risks change on second basis, depending on your infrastructure, depending on your organizational setup, depending on your geography, depending on your marketing. Your risk is going to increase, decrease. Vectors of attack and vectors of undertaking risk are going to change. They're going to increase or they're going to decrease. Some of them are going to appear, some of them are going to disappear. Depending on your risk treatment plan, you will lower some risks and you will increase others. ISO sets the bar to an organizational specific risk treatment. DSS sets the bar to a holistic level. Again, based on the fact that some of the risks might not be applicable to you. So that checkbox where you're going to come back and say, this is not applicable for me, you will have to document it. The only way to document it is you doing a risk management to a certain degree. ISO implementation will enable multiple industry standards compliance readiness. As I said before, if you adopt ISO, you will be able to achieve compliance with many industry standards in a much easier way. ISO forces maturity increase. DSS relies on increased maturity, which is pretty much everything that I've said until now about CMMI levels. DSS is asking you, do you revise your policies? Do you do this? Do you do that? Do you use version control? Everything in that area relies on your process improvement. Why would you change something that is not broken? Because it will become broken as soon as your organization evolves. This pretty much concludes my presentation. We can write not a book, 2 books on this topic, or more books on this topic. But I hope you guys have some questions that I can answer. And as Alba was saying at the beginning of the presentation, any questions that are not answered, I will answer them via email. Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope this presentation brought some different perspective upon mandatory compliance and standardization. Thank you.
Thank you, Bogdan. I would like to ask the audience to ask your questions now. In the meantime, I will start with the first question. The first question is, what is required to become HIPAA compliant?
Well, to become HIPAA compliant, you will have to, it is a long document. First of all, HIPAA compliance deal mainly with the healthcare industry. There is a parallel between HIPAA and PCI in the sense that both of them are looking at the risks, but none of them is talking about the risk. In order to become HIPAA compliant, you will have to have, let's say in a very simplistic way, your medical devices sitting on a different environment than your billing infrastructure. You will have to ensure that you do a consistent risk management, a consistent management of risks associated with every one of your environments. Same as PCI, does require a certain degree of testing. It's not that as prescriptive as PCI, but it does require pen test. It does require scanning. HIPAA didn't really define, as PCI did, what an ASV scan is for PCI, like an authorized scanning vendor. There is no authorized HIPAA vendor, scanning vendor, authorized HIPAA scanning vendor. Yeah. It is a very similar standard with PCI, but geared toward healthcare industry. We can talk about this a lot more. Achieving HIPAA is not as hard as PCI, and the reason for that is that HIPAA is, again, is not that prescriptive, and it is highly interpretable. That kind of goes back onto who was the founder, who were the founders of HIPAA, and who are the founders of PCI. PCI is DSS is managed by PCI Security Standards Council, and HIPAA is governed or administered by government organization. So one has attorneys, the other one has IT people.
Thank you, Bogdan. We will continue now with the second question. The question is, how can you compare ISO 31000 and ISO 27005? Is the ISO 27001 a subset of the ISO 31000, or those standards have different approach to the same problem?
Well, every one of them is a different standard in its own. First, ISO 31000, it's a risk management, it's a management of risk standard. 25,000 is not.
Thank you. The third question is the following. Can we run both PCI DSS and ISO 31000 at the same time?
Well, as I said during my presentation, 31,000 would set your baseline across the entire organization. PCI will apply to one environment, which is commonly called your PCI environment. Yes, you can run both of them. The way I would do it is I would adopt first 31,000 and then go up for that specific. Again, 31,000 is asking you, the first thing that is asking you is to establish your context. Within your context, you will have your common infrastructure or common environment, common business environment, and your cardholder environment. Once you have those two environments, normally what organizations do, and happen to believe is wrong, they will look only at the cardholder environment. What I would do, I would look at both of them, apply 31,000 as a common baseline, and go to the cardholder environment and look at what 31,000 didn't really address. But however, if you address all the risks associated with that environment, because again, every environment is going to be different. The two environments are going to be different. And addressing risks on both of them is going to take you to PCI compliance without pretty much any effort and without even looking at, at those 144 requirements that are part of the PCI.
Thank you for your answer, Bogdan. The third question is, what's the difference between the HIPAA security and privacy rules?
Well, when I mentioned during my presentation the privacy rule, I was thinking about the European Union privacy rule. HIPAA, it is a privacy rule geared toward the patient, to protecting the patient information.
Thank you, Bogdan, for this highly informative webinar, and I want to thank all the attendees as well who have taken time off their busy schedules to participate. I hope you all have learned something new today and your questions have been answered. This webinar is also recorded and can be found in our YouTube channel. Don't forget to check back on our upcoming webinars on topics of your interest by visiting our website or social media pages www.pecb.com. I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week. Until then, have a great week. Thank you, Bogdan, again.
Thank you.